June 14, 1941, Tobruk, Libya. The 19-year-old gunner had one job: aim, fire, hit the target. He failed every single time. 12 training sessions, 12 misses. His sergeant called him the worst shot in the entire battery. His crewmates placed bets on how quickly he'd get himself killed. When the Stukas came screaming out of the sun that morning, 8 of them, wings angled like hunting birds, sirens wailing that bone-chilling scream, everyone knew Tommy Aldrich was about to prove them right. He fired, missed by 50 feet, fired again, another miss. The bombs started falling. Men were dying. The ground erupted in geysers of sand and flame. Tommy's hands shook so badly he could barely hold the gun. His mind went blank. His training evaporated. He stopped aiming. He stopped thinking. He just pointed the barrel at the sky, and held the trigger down. What happened next changed anti-aircraft warfare forever. In less than 4 minutes, Tommy Aldrich, the kid who couldn't hit anything, shot down all 8 Stukas. Every single one. The Luftwaffe pilots never saw it coming. They flew into a wall of metal so dense, so continuous, that evasion was impossible. One by one, they fell from the sky, burning and tumbling into the desert. When the smoke cleared, Tommy collapsed. His hands were blistered. His ears were bleeding. The gun barrel glowed red-hot, warped from the heat. Around him, scattered across 3 miles of sand, lay the wreckage of 8 German dive bombers. He hadn't aimed. He'd sprayed. And somehow, impossibly, it worked. This is the story of the worst gunner in North Africa, and the 4 minutes that turned him into a legend. To understand how a terrified teenager with no marksmanship skills could achieve the impossible, you have to understand the weapon he faced. The Junkers Ju-87 Stuka wasn't just a dive bomber. It was a psychological weapon wrapped in aluminum and fear. Designed in 1935 by German engineer Hermann Pohlmann, the Stuka was built for one purpose: terror from above. Its inverted gull wings gave it an unmistakable predatory silhouette, like a bird of prey frozen mid-dive. Its fixed landing gear, while aerodynamically inefficient, made it rugged and reliable, capable of operating from rough forward airstrips. But the real genius, the element that made the Stuka a nightmare, was the sirens. Mounted on the landing gear fairings were wind-driven devices called Jericho trumpets. When the aircraft entered a dive, air rushing through these sirens created a high-pitched, wailing scream that could be heard for miles. It wasn't accidental. It was engineered psychological warfare. The sound alone could break men before a single bomb fell. Soldiers would abandon their positions, flee their trenches, throw down their weapons, anything to escape that mechanical shriek. The Stuka's dive bombing technique was devastating in its precision. The pilot would roll the aircraft into a near-vertical dive, sometimes as steep as 90 degrees, plummeting toward the target at speeds exceeding 350 miles per hour. At around 1,500 feet, automatic pull-out systems would activate, yanking the plane out of the dive even if the pilot blacked out from G-forces. The bomb, released at the perfect moment, would continue downward with pinpoint accuracy. Experienced Stuka crews could place a 500-kilogram bomb within 10 meters of a target. Against fortifications, supply depots, or troop concentrations, this was apocalyptic. In the early war years, Poland in 1939, France in 1940, the Balkans in 1941, the Stuka was unstoppable. It spearheaded the Blitzkrieg, destroying bridges before armies could retreat, obliterating defensive positions before infantry arrived, turning organized resistance into panicked routes. Footage from these campaigns shows the Stuka's devastating efficiency, columns of refugees scattering as the sirens sound, tanks erupting in flames, entire city blocks collapsing into rubble. But the Stuka had a fatal weakness: speed, or rather, the lack of it. With a maximum speed of just 255 miles per hour in level flight, and far slower when pulling out of a dive, the Stuka was a sitting duck against modern fighters or concentrated anti-aircraft fire. The Luftwaffe learned this brutally during the Battle of Britain in summer 1940. When Stukas encountered Spitfires and Hurricanes, the results were catastrophic. The RAF tore through Stuka formations like paper, shooting them down in droves. In one engagement over the English Channel, 9 out of 12 Stukas were destroyed in less than 10 minutes. The losses were so severe that by mid-August 1940, the Stuka was withdrawn from operations over Britain entirely. But withdraw didn't mean retire. The Luftwaffe simply redeployed the Stuka to theaters where air superiority was assured and ground defenses were weaker. North Africa was perfect. The vast, open deserts offered few places to hide. Allied positions were spread thin, supplied by tenuous convoy routes, and defended by a patchwork of units with outdated equipment. The Stuka found new life in the sand. By early 1941, Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps was pushing into Libya, with Stuka squadrons providing critical close air support. The dive bombers would appear multiple times daily, striking supply convoys, artillery positions, and defensive fortifications with mechanical regularity. For the men on the ground, the Stuka became synonymous with death. There was no shelter from a vertical dive, no foxhole deep enough, just the scream of the sirens, the whistle of falling bombs, and the shattering impact that turned earth and flesh into debris. The Allied defenders had anti-aircraft guns, primarily the Swedish-designed Bofors 40mm cannon, along with heavier British 3.7-inch guns and various machine guns. The Bofors was an excellent weapon on paper, accurate, reliable, with a rate of fire up to 120 rounds per minute. But it required skill. The gunner had to calculate lead time, where the target would be when the shell arrived, while accounting for the aircraft's speed, altitude, angle, and rate of climb or descent. It was a complex geometric problem that had to be solved in seconds, under fire, with adrenaline flooding every nerve. Most gunners never mastered it. Training was rushed. Combat experience was earned through survival or death. The turnover rate was staggering. A good AA gunner might last weeks. An average one, days. The learning curve was written in blood. And then there was Tommy Aldridge. Thomas Edward Aldridge was born in March 1922 in a small village outside Manchester, England. His father worked in a textile mill. His mother raised 5 children in a cramped 2-bedroom house with a leaking roof and no indoor plumbing. Tommy was the middle child, quiet, bookish, terrible at sports. He spent his childhood reading adventure novels and drawing sketches of airplanes. He dreamed of being a pilot. He never imagined he'd spend the war trying to shoot them down. When war broke out in September 1939, Tommy was 17, too young to enlist. By the time he turned 18 in March 1940, the situation had changed. The phony war was over. Germany had invaded Denmark and Norway. The fall of France was weeks away. Britain stood alone, and recruitment offices were swamped with volunteers. Tommy enlisted in April, swept up in the patriotic fervor, the posters promising adventure and glory. Basic training was 6 weeks of shouting, marching, and shooting at static targets. Tommy was adequate with a rifle, not exceptional, but passable. He was fit enough, smart enough, disciplined enough. The army assigned him to an infantry battalion destined for North Africa. But 2 weeks before deployment, his unit was reorganized. A shortage of anti-aircraft crews meant infantry soldiers were being cross-trained and reassigned. Tommy, along with 30 others, was pulled from his battalion and sent to an abbreviated AA gunnery course. The course lasted 2 weeks. 2 weeks to learn the Bofors 40mm cannon, its mechanisms, its ballistics, its quirks. 2 weeks to understand deflection shooting, lead angles, and vertical tracking. 2 weeks to transform from a rifleman who shot at stationary targets into a gunner who could hit fast-moving aircraft at variable altitudes. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. Tommy struggled from the start. The mathematics of deflection shooting eluded him. When the instructors explained lead time, that you had to aim not at where the plane was, but where it would be, his brain locked up. He'd overthink, adjust, readjust, and by the time he fired, the target was long gone. In 12 live-fire exercises, he scored 0 hits. Not a single shell came close. His instructor, a grizzled veteran of the First World War, pulled him aside after the final exercise. "Aldridge," he said, "you're a bright lad, but you think too much. This isn't chess. You don't have time to calculate. You have to feel it. Trust your gut." Tommy nodded, but he didn't have a gut feeling. He had doubt, fear, and a sinking certainty that he was going to die the first time he faced real combat. In late May 1941, Tommy's unit shipped out to Egypt. The voyage took 3 weeks, sailing around the Cape of Good Hope to avoid U-boats in the Mediterranean. By the time they arrived in Alexandria, the situation in North Africa had deteriorated. Rommel's offensive had pushed the British back across Libya. Only one position held, Tobruk. The port city of Tobruk, on the Libyan coast, had become a thorn in Rommel's side. Captured by the Allies in January 1941, it was now surrounded by German and Italian forces but still held by a garrison of Australian, British, Indian, and South African troops. The defenders had fortified the perimeter, turning it into a maze of trenches, bunkers, and gun positions. But they were isolated, supplied only by nighttime naval convoys that ran a gauntlet of air and sea attacks. Every gallon of fuel, every round of ammunition, every ration tin had to be brought in under fire. The Luftwaffe hammered Tobruk daily. Stuka squadrons, operating from forward airstrips in the desert, struck the defenses multiple times a day. The garrison's anti-aircraft defenses were undermanned, undersupplied, and bleeding experienced gunners faster than replacements arrived. When Tommy Aldridge and his hastily trained unit disembarked in Tobruk in early June, they were thrown directly into the fire. Sergeant Michael Harrigan, a veteran of the garrison who'd been there since the siege began, took one look at the new arrivals and knew most of them wouldn't last a week. Tommy, in particular, caught his eye. Tall, lanky, with nervous eyes and hands that never stopped fidgeting. Harrigan had seen that look before. It was the look of someone who knew they were out of their depth and was just waiting for the inevitable. Harrigan assigned Tommy to gun position 7 on the southern perimeter. It wasn't a coveted posting. Position 7 was isolated, far from the main defensive line, poorly supplied, and considered expendable. It was where you sent the green recruits, the ones who probably wouldn't survive long enough to matter. Tommy's crew consisted of 2 others, Corporal James MacLeod, a wiry Scotsman from Glasgow with a dark sense of humor, and Private Peter van der Merwe, a South African who'd been at Tobruk since February and had the hollow-eyed stare of someone who'd seen too much. Tommy's first week at Position 7 was a study in failure. The Stukas came every day, sometimes twice. Each time, Tommy would track them, swing the Bofors, calculate the lead, and miss. Every single shot. The explosions left him deaf and disoriented. The sirens made his hands shake uncontrollably. After his 6th consecutive failed engagement, Sergeant Harrigan pulled him aside. "Aldridge, I'm going to ask you once. Do you want out? I can transfer you to a labor battalion. No shame. AA work isn't for everyone." Tommy's mouth was dry. Part of him wanted to say yes. Wanted to walk away from the gun, the sirens, the terror. But he thought about his crewmates, MacLeod, who never complained, who kept loading shells even when they all knew Tommy would miss. Van der Merwe, who'd been through hell and still showed up every day. He thought about the men in the trenches, counting on the AA guns to keep the Stukas off them. "No, Sergeant," Tommy said. "I'll stay." Harrigan nodded. "Then figure it out, son. Because right now, you're more dangerous to us than to them." He walked away, leaving Tommy alone with his failures. MacLeod, surprisingly, never gave Tommy grief. The Scot had seen enough combat to know that confidence and competence were luxuries. Most soldiers were terrified, fumbling through each day, hoping their luck held. The difference between a hero and a corpse was usually just timing. He told Tommy to stop overthinking. "Just point the bloody gun and shoot," he'd say. "Can't be worse than missing." But Tommy couldn't stop overthinking. Every night, lying in his bunk, he'd replay each engagement in his mind. He'd visualize the Stukas, their dive angles, the trajectories. He filled a notebook with calculations, trying to teach himself the mathematics his instructors had failed to drill into him. But when the sirens sounded, all of that evaporated. Theory meant nothing when your hands were shaking and the sky was full of screaming death. The other gun crews started taking bets. How long would Aldridge last? Some gave him 3 days. Others, a week. Van der Merwe refused to participate. He'd seen enough randomness in combat to know that betting on survival was pointless. Skill mattered less than luck. And sometimes, he told the others, the worst gunner gets lucky. Sometimes the spray hits. He had no idea how right he was. June 14, 1941, dawned clear and hot. The sun rose over the Mediterranean, turning the sky a pale, burning white. The garrison stirred slowly. Men crawling from bunkers, lighting cigarettes, boiling tea over small fires. The night had been quiet. No artillery. No probing attacks. Too quiet. Quiet always meant something was coming. At 0745 hours, the warning came through. Reconnaissance had spotted a large formation inbound from the west. Stukas, escorted by Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters. Estimated 12 to 15 dive bombers. Target, the southern perimeter. Position 7 was directly in their path. Alarms wailed across the garrison. Men scrambled to their posts. Infantry dove into trenches. Medics prepped aid stations. Gun crews hauled ammunition, checked mechanisms, scanned the sky. At Position 7, Tommy and MacLeod stacked shells beside the Bofors. Van der Merwe climbed onto the observation platform, binoculars pressed to his eyes. The air was still, oppressively still, the kind of stillness that made the skin crawl. At 0830, the Stukas appeared. Not 15. 8. Someone in intelligence had miscounted, or the formation had split. It didn't matter. 8 was more than enough. They came in low and fast from the west, black specks that grew with terrifying speed. Above them, higher up, the Messerschmitt escorts circled lazily, untouchable. The Stukas formed into a staggered line, preparing to dive. Van der Merwe shouted coordinates. Tommy swung the Bofors, hands slick with sweat. His heart hammered. His vision tunneled. The lead Stuka banked, lining up its approach. Tommy tracked it, barrel following the black cross on the wing. Let it. Calculate the deflection. Adjust for speed. His mind churned through the formulas. The Stuka rolled into its dive. The sirens began. That sound, high-pitched, oscillating, inhuman, cut through everything. It bypassed thought and struck directly at the brainstem, triggering primal terror. Tommy's hand started shaking. He pulled the trigger. The Bofors roared. The shells screamed into the sky. Mississippi 50 feet wide. The Stuka kept diving, nose pointed straight down, speed building. At 1,500 feet, the bomb released. Tommy saw it falling, a dark teardrop tumbling end over end. He threw himself flat. The explosion hit 30 meters away. The shockwave lifted him off the ground and slammed him into the sandbags. His ears went silent, replaced by a high-pitched ringing. His vision blurred. He scrambled back to the gun. The second Stuka was already diving. He fired. Another miss. The bomb hit closer, 20 meters. Shrapnel whined overhead. One of the ammunition crates detonated, sending a geyser of sand and metal into the air. Van der Merwe screamed, clutching his leg, blood pouring between his fingers. McLeod dragged him behind cover and kept loading shells. Third Stuka. Tommy fired. Missed. The bomb hit the left side of the gun position, collapsing half the sandbag wall. Tommy's ears were bleeding now. The world sounded like it was underwater. Everything moved in slow motion. Fourth Stuka diving. Fifth lining up. Sixth and seventh circling. Eighth pulling into position. The entire perimeter was burning. Explosions everywhere. Men screaming. Positions collapsing. Tommy fired again. Missed again. His mind was static. Pure white noise. No thought. No calculation. Just terror. And then something inside him snapped. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe rage. Maybe the realization that he was going to die anyway, so nothing mattered. Whatever it was, Tommy stopped aiming. He stopped trying to calculate deflection or lead time. He stopped thinking entirely. He just pointed the Bofors at the center of the Stuka formation, where they were clustered tightest, and held down the trigger. The gun exploded into life. Shells poured out, one after another, a continuous roaring stream. The barrel bucked wildly. The recoil shook Tommy's entire body. McLeod fed ammunition as fast as his hands could move. The Bofors was rated for 120 rounds per minute. Tommy was pushing it past 140. The mechanism was cycling so fast it was starting to glow. He wasn't aiming at a single plane. He was filling a volume of sky with metal, creating a wall of shrapnel that the Stukas had to fly through. Spray and pray in its purest, most desperate form. And it worked. The lead Stuka, pulling out of its dive, flew directly into the barrage. A shell clipped its engine. Black smoke erupted. The plane shuddered, losing power. The pilot tried to bank, but the controls were sluggish. The Stuka nosed down and slammed into the desert at 200 miles per hour. The impact was so violent the plane disintegrated, wings ripping off, fuselage crumpling, debris scattering across 100 yards. Tommy kept firing. Didn't stop. Didn't think. Just held the trigger. The second Stuka banked hard, trying to evade. Too late. 3 shells hit in rapid succession. The first punched through the fuselage. The second severed the tail. The third hit the fuel tank. The Stuka exploded mid-air, a ball of orange flame and black smoke. Pieces rained down, wings, propeller, sections of the cockpit. Third Stuka tried to climb. It was too slow, too low, pulling out of the dive with no altitude to spare. A shell tore through the tail section, shearing off the elevator controls. The plane flipped inverted, spun twice, and spiraled into the rocks half a mile away. The explosion sent up a pillar of black smoke that could be seen from the entire garrison. McLeod was screaming, a wordless, primal roar. He slammed another magazine into place. The Bofors was so hot now the paint was blistering off. Tommy's arms were numb. His vision was blurred, but he kept firing. Fourth Stuka took a hit to the port wing. The wing folded, metal screeching, and tore completely off. The plane spun like a leaf, tumbling out of control, and crashed into the sand dunes. The impact crater was 15 feet deep. Fifth Stuka disintegrated. A direct hit to the bomb load. The explosion was massive, so powerful it knocked the sixth Stuka off course. The shockwave sent the sixth plane careening sideways, straight into the seventh. The two aircraft tangled, locked together, wings crumpling. They fell as one twisted mass of metal, hitting the ground with a double explosion that shook the earth. Eighth and final Stuka broke off. The pilot yanked the stick hard, desperate to escape. The plane climbed steeply, engine screaming. Tommy swung the gun, tracking it. His hands were blistered. His arms felt like lead. He fired the last burst. The shells tore through the cockpit. Glass shattered. The pilot slumped forward. The Stuka's nose dropped. It glided silently for a few seconds, eerily peaceful, then slammed into the desert floor a quarter-mile away. Silence. The sirens were gone. The explosion stopped. The sky was empty, just wisps of black smoke drifting in the wind. Tommy let go of the gun and staggered backward. His legs gave out. He collapsed onto his back, staring up at the clear blue sky. His ears were ringing. His hands were raw, skin peeling off in sheets. The Bofors barrel glowed cherry red, warped from the heat. McLeod dropped the ammunition belt and fell against the sandbags, chest heaving, face black with soot. Van der Merwe, still clutching his bleeding leg, stared at the wreckage scattered across the desert. 8 burning piles of twisted metal. 8. McLeod started laughing. A wild, hysterical sound. He looked at Tommy, grinned with teeth white against his blackened face, and gave a thumbs up. Tommy closed his eyes. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. He just lay there, trembling, trying to remember how to breathe. 8 Stukas. 4 minutes. 1 gun. It was impossible. But the wrecks were there, smoking in the sand. The sky was clear. The attack was over. Tommy Aldridge, the worst shot in North Africa, had just achieved the impossible. Word spread through the garrison like wildfire. By noon, every soldier in Tobruk knew. The kid at position 7. 8 Stukas. Single-handedly. The stories grew with each retelling. 10 kills, 12, an entire squadron wiped out. But the officers verified 8. They sent patrols to count the wreckage. All 8 were confirmed, scattered in a rough arc around position 7. Pilots still strapped in their seats. Some bodies thrown clear, broken in the sand. Sergeant Harrigan arrived an hour after the attack. He stood at the gun position for a long time, staring at the wrecked Bofors, the spent shell casings piled knee-high, the scorched earth. Then he looked at Tommy, who sat in the shade with a canteen, still shaking. Harrigan didn't say a word. He just nodded once and walked away. The other gun crews treated Tommy differently now. The joke stopped. The bets were settled. Men asked him questions. How'd you do it? What's the secret? Can you teach us? Tommy didn't know what to tell them. There was no secret. He'd panicked. Abandoned his training. Just pulled the trigger and didn't let go. But the results spoke louder than explanations. 8 confirmed kills. The highest single engagement tally for an AA gunner in the North African campaign. Possibly the highest in the entire war. Tommy Aldridge, who couldn't hit a barn door, had become a legend overnight. The psychological impact on the Luftwaffe was immediate. Stuka crews were already nervous about Tobruk. The defenses were tougher than expected, losses mounting. But this was different. An entire formation wiped out by a single gun. Intelligence reports tried to explain it. Was it a new weapon? Radar-guided flak? Some kind of trap? The truth was simpler and more terrifying. It was just a kid with a Bofors, firing blind, getting lucky. But in war, luck and skill look the same when the outcome is death. The Stukas kept coming, but they started flying higher, dropping bombs from safer altitudes, sacrificing accuracy for survival. The defenders noticed. Morale lifted. British command took notice too. A colonel from divisional headquarters visited position 7, interviewed the crew, inspected the gun. He asked Tommy to demonstrate his technique. Tommy tried to explain there wasn't one. He just fired as fast as possible at the center of the formation. The colonel frowned, took notes, left. A week later, a new training directive went out. Saturation fire was now an authorized tactic for AA units. Tommy's panic had become doctrine. But Tommy didn't feel like a hero. He had nightmares every night, the sirens, the faces of the pilots through the canopy glass, the explosions. He flinched at loud noises. His hands shook when he touched the gun. The crew saw a legend. Tommy saw 8 burning planes and the boys inside them. His age, following orders. And he'd killed them. McLeod tried to help. Told him it was war, they'd have killed him without hesitation. He'd saved lives by taking theirs. Tommy nodded but didn't believe it. He couldn't shake the image of the 8th Stuka, the pilot slumped in the cockpit, the plane gliding silently before it crashed. That pilot thought he was safe, thought he'd escaped. And Tommy shot him. Van der Merwe, once his leg healed, came back to the gun. He told Tommy something that stuck: war isn't about being a hero. It's about surviving long enough to go home. Sometimes surviving means doing terrible things you'll carry forever. But carrying them beats being dead. Tommy didn't know if he agreed, but he stayed at the gun. The Stukas came back twice more before the siege lifted. Tommy shot at them both times. No more kills. Maybe the Luftwaffe learned. Maybe his luck ran out. Maybe 8 was enough. He didn't care. He just wanted it to end. Tobruk held. Against all odds, the garrison held. In November 1941, Operation Crusader broke the siege. Tommy left the desert with his unit, thinner, quieter, older than his 19 years. He was recommended for a medal. Records conflict on whether he received it. Some say he did. Others say the paperwork was lost. Either way, Tommy never wore it. After North Africa, he served in Italy, then France after D-Day. He survived the war. Returned to England in 1945. Married. Raised 3 kids. Worked in a factory. Never spoke about the 8 Stukas. When his children asked if he fought, he said yes but gave no details. When his grandchildren found an old photo of him beside a Bofors, he changed the subject. MacLeod stayed in touch for a few years after the war. Then the letters stopped. Van der Merwe returned to South Africa, never heard from again. The Bofors at Position 7 was destroyed in a later attack, replaced, eventually scrapped. No monument was built. No plaque placed. The desert reclaimed the crash sites. Tommy Aldridge died in 1987, age 65, of a heart attack while gardening. His obituary mentioned his service but gave no details. At his funeral, an old army mate told the story: the day Tommy downed 8 Stukas. Most thought it was exaggeration, a tall tale, but it wasn't. It happened. June 14, 1941. Position 7, Tobruk. The records confirm it. The Luftwaffe's own reports, declassified decades later, confirm it. Oberleutnant Hans Schroeder, a Stuka pilot interviewed in the 1970s, mentioned the day his squadron lost 8 planes to what they thought was an automated flak system. He described it as unstoppable, a continuous stream of fire filling the sky. When asked what weapon it was, he said he never found out. Just that after that day, no one wanted to fly over Tobruk. It was a kid with a Bofors. A kid who couldn't aim. A kid who stopped trying. Tommy Aldridge's story is not just about him. It's about thousands of young men at anti-aircraft guns across every theater, trying to shoot down machines that seemed invincible. It's about the Stuka, a weapon designed to break spirits. And it's about the moment fear transforms into something else. Not courage, but desperate refusal to die quietly. The Bofors 40mm wasn't perfect. It required skill, training, steady nerves, things in short supply during 1940 to 1941. But it had one advantage: rate of fire. In the right hands, or the wrong hands in the right circumstances, it could turn sky into a death zone. Tommy proved that. Not through precision, but volume. Not through calculation, but raw aggression. Saturation fire wasn't new. Naval AA doctrine had moved that direction since World War I. But ground AA units were still trained in aimed fire, assuming ammunition was limited. Tommy's engagement proved that wrong. Sometimes quantity mattered more than quality. Sometimes you didn't need to aim. You just needed to shoot. This lesson was applied more broadly as the war progressed. By 1943, AA batteries trained in barrage fire, creating overlapping fields that didn't rely on accuracy. Proximity-fused shells in 1944 made it even more effective. Tommy, in his panic, had stumbled onto a tactic that became standard. But the human cost was rarely discussed. Spray and pray required ammunition, logistics, supply lines. It required gunners willing to stand at their posts while bombs fell, willing to keep firing when every instinct screamed to run. Many didn't. Many broke. No one blamed them. The ones who stayed weren't always the best trained or most courageous. Sometimes they were just too scared to move, or too stubborn to quit. Tommy was both. Terrified, but didn't run. Stayed because MacLeod was there. Van der Merwe was there. Leaving them felt worse than dying. That loyalty kept positions manned. Not patriotism. Not ideology. Just refusal to abandon the men beside you. The Stuka, for all its early success, was ultimately a victim of its design. Built for fast mobile war against disorganized enemies. When war slowed, when defenses hardened, the Stuka became obsolete. By 1943 it was phased out in the West, relegated to the Eastern Front where Soviet defenses were less concentrated. Even there, losses were catastrophic. But in 1941, in North Africa's deserts, the Stuka was king. And on June 14, a 19-year-old with terrible aim knocked 8 from the sky. It wasn't a miracle, wasn't even skillful, just a terrified kid who wouldn't let go of the trigger. And a universe that, for once, rewarded desperation instead of punishing it. There's a photograph, taken late June 1941, of gun position 7. Grainy, black and white, easily lost in archives. In the foreground, the Bofors, barrel scorched, surrounded by spent shells. In the background, 3 figures, Tommy, McLeod, Van der Merwe, not smiling, exhausted, hollow-eyed, but standing. They survived. That photograph is the only physical evidence. No film, no recorded interviews, just one image, filed at the Imperial War Museum, mislabeled and nearly forgotten. Historians have tried piecing together the full story, cross-referencing logs, Luftwaffe records, scattered survivor accounts. Details are murky, but the core truth is undeniable. 8 Stukas, 1 gun, 4 minutes. Sounds like fiction, but war is full of such moments. Moments where the impossible happens, where underdogs win, where luck and desperation combine to create something that looks like heroism. Tommy never called himself a hero. He knew better. Heroism requires choice. He hadn't chosen. He reacted, panicked, survived. But history doesn't care about intent. History cares about results. The result was 8 wrecks in the sand, 8 Luftwaffe crews who never went home, and one 19-year-old who lived to become an old man, haunted by memories of smoke and falling metal. The lesson, if there is one, isn't about courage or skill. It's about persistence. Refusing to give up when giving up makes sense. Pulling the trigger one more time when every previous shot missed. Because sometimes that next shot matters. That next burst hits. And in war, where life and death are measured in fractions of seconds, sometimes that's enough. Tommy Aldrich had terrible aim. But one day, in one desperate moment, his aim didn't matter. He filled the sky with metal. The metal found targets. And for 4 minutes in the Libyan desert, a 19-year-old who couldn't hit a barn became the deadliest gunner in North Africa. Not a story about skill. A story about survival. And survival, in the end, is the only victory that matters.